think let's take a look at what happens in the event of a successful Chinese invasion of Taiwan. I'm curious what Indian intelligence is saying about that kind of scenario, because one, that would show that the United States is not a reliable ally, as you've been hinting at. And two, that would give China tremendous control over the region. How would India be able to handle that essentially on its own? Would India be able to wrangle together, other nations like Japan and Australia to mount some kind of counterattack?
In the event of a Chinese action in Taiwan, you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that again, it's a huge if question, because let me be clear that I'm not somebody who believes that Taiwan will remain independent for a long time. All right. The Chinese expansionist attitude, we've seen that with Xinjiang, we've seen that with Tibet, we're seeing what's happening with Hong Kong, and it's only a matter of time before they begin their actions with
and
Taiwan.
What we saw with India.
Yeah, right. So that kind of an action is inevitable. But the question about what will India do, that is very hard to say, because policy making in India is tailored by multiple factors. Most important being the personality at the helm, right? Depending on who's in power at that point in time, what they intend to do, the policy that India will adopt will be very different. So, because I'll tell you this, in 1992, we had a prime minister. 1991, that's when India's economy had opened up, and we were increasingly trying to make friendship with a lot of these Western economies, as well as Southeast Asian countries. That's why we had something known as the Look East policy. So I know from sources that at that point in time, when the prime minister was discussing with some of the security officials, and he tried to make it a point to convey to the Taiwanese that in case China did something with Taiwan, India would open a second front. Exactly what you're asking today, right? But that was done in 92, but there is no evidence of such promises being made either before or after, right? So even whether you look at Tibet for that instance, also there is no clear-cut strategy in India. These are all ad hoc policies. Depending on the merit of the situation, they will take up whatever calls need to be taken. But given the fact that the entire world speaks of a one China policy and nobody has ever dared to say that Taiwan is a country, I doubt if India by itself would take any action that is because you must also realize that if India needs to grow, it is not possible without the Chinese help, right? So even as we are fighting with China, even as we have a conflict with China, our trade with China is only expanding. Right, we might keep the Chinese out of certain critical areas, markets, but overall speaking, India will need to still continue continue having an economic relationship with the Chinese if it needs to grow. So keep bearing in mind all these factors. I don't know to what extent, what kind of help India can give Taiwan in the worst case scenario that you're pointing to. But short of that worst case scenario, there are lots that the two countries can do in terms of cooperating with each other on the chips, in microchips and so on. There is a lot of cooperation that can happen between India and Taiwan. So I think those are more important things for us to focus on. In the worst case scenario, what's going to happen, that Lord alone knows.
Well, so then right now with the growth of the Quad, the alliance between the US, India, Japan, and Australia, is that solving some of these intelligence problems that have been there in the past? Do you think this is actually throwing up important roadblocks to the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, if this question is in the realm of intelligence, then I think that as far as sharing of strategic assessments is concerned, I think it is happening periodically between all these four countries, and that's fine. But these four countries are not in a military alliance. That is something that they're all very clear about, right? They're not in a military alliance. So so they're trying to look at other ways through which they can sort of stand up to China. Those other ways could be in terms of economy, in terms of infrastructural growth, in terms of finding alternatives to alternate political formulas to what the Chinese are giving to these countries of the global south. For example, let's take Sri Lanka or countries as such. What are the Chinese actually telling these countries? Unlike the West, when you're granting a loan or when you're going in with aid projects, the United States and the West comes in with a series of conditions, quite logically, because if you need to get back the money that you've invested, if you need to see those countries' economies bounce back, they will have their own conditionalities. But the way this is interpreted by the Chinese and detractors of the West is that this is interference in domestic politics of that country. Whereas what the Chinese are saying is, we leave your domestic aspects to yourself. We don't really care about it. So, for instance, look at what's been happening in the last 24 hours. Um, the Taliban is now making a lot of noise in terms of making friendship with China and so on, because the Chinese need lithium. It needs other rare earth minerals from Afghanistan. But in return, the Chinese are not going to say anything at all to make amends in Taliban's policies within Afghanistan, right? So now what the Quad essentially is trying to do is try and figure out mechanisms through which they can confront these kind of issues. That is, what kind of alternate measures can we bring about to confront the Chinese narrative that is doing its rounds in these countries and so on. So I think that is the focus of the grouping such as Quad. It's not a military alliance. So to the extent that it's not a military alliance, I can't really say how much of an intelligence influence that it's going to have, and that's precisely why the United States, say India and the US and so on, they have other intelligence sharing mechanisms, both bilateral and multilateral. Like there's something known as SIGINT specific, where signals intelligence intercepts are shared with each other's with these amongst these countries. It might not be something as similar to the Five Eyes. It might not be as robust and open, but nevertheless, there's still sharing of intelligence that is going on, and it's without a doubt, it is somewhat focused on China. But yeah, none of these are formalized, and I don't think they can ever be formalized because of the differences between these countries. So one point that I would like to make here, that is something that I wanted to emphasize, is that when it comes to intelligence relationships, much of it, especially in the context of India with the West, much of it is determined by the individuals at the helm. If they have good relationships with the counterparts in the West, then there is no limits to the cooperation, right? But as an institution or as a country, there are a lot of roadblocks, and with good reasons. And one of them is also because we've seen in the past that I mean, you must know that you must have. I mean, if you have ever read about the American and Israeli intelligence cooperation, there is absolutely no tolerance among the Americans if at all the Israelis try to spy on you, and that is what happened in the Jonathan Pollard case and so on, right? But whereas in India, every time that the Indians have tried to cooperate with the Americans, we have found that many Indians have been turned around as American assets. Many Indian intelligence. So especially when you are a country with significant power asymmetries, it takes a lot of time to develop an intelligence officer, and if he or she is turned and is working for the Americans, it it takes a massive toll, both economic and the counterintelligence stress that it poses on India is really really massive. So when you consider all these factors, formalization of any sort of intelligence alliance with the United States becomes difficult, but there is sufficient room for a lot of cooperation to happen. And these are not necessarily word plays. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some of those areas, do you think?
Like I said, just in terms of sharing of strategic assessments, that's fine. So long as they're able to protect the sources and so on. So that is one area, and we have something. India and the United States have something known as BECA, that's Basic Exchange Agreement. So according to which there is satellite imagery being shared and so on in real time. But like I said, when you're talking about technical intelligence, anybody who works with satellites and stuff know that it is not 100% foolproof, right? The Chinese can do stuff that can manipulate all this, or they can bring up they can develop certain deceptive measures to make sure that the satellites don't really catch what they're doing and all that. So even though there are areas for India and the United States to cooperate vis-a-vis China on the with regard to border surveillance and so on, there are limits to what kind of results they can bring about. So that's one area. But the most important impediment that in India US intelligence cooperation, which I will keep repeating again and again, is the American attitude towards Pakistan. Right. So long as they can't clearly take India's side when it comes to Pakistan, and just about yesterday I was reading somewhere that there are again talks within the United States about using Kashmir as a card to sort of blackmail India as a consequence of India's position in the Russia over the Russia-Ukraine war. Now these are things that don't really sit well with the Indians, right? So to answer the question and put it in brief, yes, as far as border monitoring is concerned, there is room for it, but beyond that, I don't think there's much that can happen.